the big problem the Europeans have got is basically arrogance, I think, towards China. They think that they thought they were superior, that they didn't believe in the rise of China, that they wouldn't be able to compete with the top European firms, blah, blah, blah. And look what happens. The biggest, most important industry in Europe is the car industry, and the Chinese have taken them to the cleaners because they were smug, complacent, thought it could never happen. So they're in, Mercedes-Benz, Volkswagen, all these firms are in big trouble. Who would have thought that? If you go back to 1978, 1980, the Germans were very far-sighted. Volkswagen was very far-sighted. The Chinese wanted to Western investment, European investment. So I think Volkswagen built its first plant in China in 1982 because they wanted the investment they needed to learn. They needed the technology. Now, what's happened? It's a complete inversion in the relationship. From being inferior, they're on top.
大家好，今天这期视频可能会彻底颠覆你对当下世界格局的认知。我们要分享的是英国学者当中国统治世界作者马丁出雅克一段极其犀利的访谈节选。这段访谈来自海外深度对谈节目 Unapologetic， 主持人抛出的问题一个比一个尖锐，而雅克的回答更是毫不留情。在这段采访中，雅克直言不讳地谈到了特朗普到底代表着什么，美国民主为何正在滑向深渊，中国为什么已经强大到无法被遏制，台湾问题最终会如何收场，以及统治了世界200年的西方文明，为什么正在不可逆转地走向终结。说到马丁吹雅克，这个人可不简单，他是西方世界最早认真研究中国崛起的顶尖学者之一。早在20多年前，当整个西方还沉浸在历史终结论的迷梦中时，他就已经敏锐地意识到中国的崛起将重塑整个世界秩序。他的代表作《当中国统治世界》出版后，在全球引发巨大争议，被翻译成20多种语言。当时无数西方学者嘲笑他危言耸听，说他高估了中国。结果呢，10几年过去了，他书中的预言一个接一个的变成了现实。雅克的背景也很有意思，他出生于英国，早年投身政治，后来转向学术研究，长期在伦敦政治经济学院和剑桥大学担任高级研究员。他的妻子是马来西亚华人，这让他对中华文化有着比一般西方学者更深的理解和共情。他曾多次访问中国，亲眼见证了这个国家从相对落后到全面腾飞的全过程。更难得的是，雅克不是那种坐在书斋里凭空想象的学者，他和中国政商两界都有广泛接触，对中国的体制、文化和发展逻辑有着独到的见解。他看中国不是带着西方的傲慢和偏见去看，而是真正试图站在中国的角度去理解。正因为如此，他的观点往往比那些只会喊中国威胁论的西方政客要深刻得多，也清醒得多。那么在这次访谈中，他到底说了哪些让人醍醐灌顶的话？他对特朗普第2任期有怎样的判断？他为什么说西方时代已经终结？他对台湾问题的预测又是什么？下面我们来看看他在本次访谈中到底说了什么。
And people were increasingly frustrated by and let down by the American presidencies. So what Trump was articulated the anger towards and fear of China, which had not really been articulated except in traditional ways in the US at that point. And he's really, in so doing, he's, I think, recreated or redefined the American political stage in a very profound way. He's America. So a number of points we might draw from that. First of all, American democracy is under significant challenge, I think. The role of, he's Trump himself is a sort of neo-autocrat, if you like, the way he operates. I mean, he's ruled essentially by edict and completely bypassed Congress. So America is changing in a very, the way in which the government sends in ICE people to essentially attack migrant communities or weaken them or banish them from the country. So America's, and meanwhile, America has, in a way, with the whole tariff regime, recognized the weakness of the American economy as a competitive unit in the world and introduced tariffs as a means to try and readjust that situation. I think that Trump marks globally a retreat in that he talks about the Western Hemisphere. Well, there are two elements to this, if you like. He talks about the Western Hemisphere. He doesn't. Greater America is Greater America within the context of the Western Hemisphere. Greenland, for example, is talked about in that context. Now that's a significant retreat from China, from the United States as the global hegemon, because previously the question was, international order, the United States is the leader of the international order and so on. Now Trump is talking in hemispheric terms rather than global terms. I think the other element of this is his attitude towards China. Now, for Trump, the real enemy is China. But he has been unable. I mean, he in the clashes he's had with China, each stage he's been forced to retreat. In April, and then more recently, and the reason is because of the rare metals threat and so on. So China's too strong now for America. So Trump would like to do, but can't do he'd like to roll back China in some way, and that's how it all started. I mean, I think when he came in 2016, that's what he thought he could do, and they can't do it, and they won't be able to do it because the situation's getting worse all the time.
Worse for the Americans.
Worse for the Americans, yeah. Sorry, and China's getting stronger. I mean, and China thinks strategically. So after the first, I think the Chinese learnt a lot from the first term. The first term, they weren't really prepared for it. They'd never seen anyone like Trump before. They'd had the American leaders they're dealing with ever since Nixon in 1972 had been relatively, they've been part of a certain liberal America, which we're familiar with. And then along comes Trump, who's a totally different kettle of fish, someone we haven't seen in modern times as an American leader. And the Chinese were, because they'd cooperated with America ever since 1972, they had a relatively benign view. I mean, they knew it was competition and all that, but they didn't think of America as the enemy, and they were grateful. They learned from America, blah blah blah. All the technology and so on. And now I think what happened is they learned that that America could not be trusted. Now, in the Communist Party leadership, ever since Jiang Zemin, there'd been a view that China just had a certain period of development like they were having before America
tries to put a stop to it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, of course, what happened. But when it actually happened, I don't think they were really prepared for it. But they realize now exactly that America couldn't be trusted. And they prepared meticulously for the return of someone like Trump. Actually, it was Trump 2.0. And if you look at, I mean, one of the most interesting and graphic examples is the Chinese just greatly reduced their dependence on the American market. I mean, between 2016 and 2024, the Chinese reduced the significance of Chinese exports to the Chinese American market from, I think it was 20% down to 13%. That's a big reduction in a very short space of time. So they were just they you know, a emphasis on self-dependence and so on. And then, you know, if you look now, you know, they were in difficulties in the Biden period over chips and so on because of China was well behind America at that point, America and Netherlands and Taiwan, and so, you know, the Chinese knew which industries they had to develop, knew which components they needed to be able to compete in, and now they're still behind in chips, but not very far behind. I mean, actually, Jason Huang, you know, from NVIDIA, is right about. He's absolutely right that if you do what you're doing, then you're just going to create. China's just going to develop a very competitive and large computer industry, which will outcompete us, and that's in the process of what's happening. And AI. Well, China was significantly behind, but I don't think it is. I think if you look reading the commentators at the moment in Financial Times and other places, I mean, there's a general view that probably China is, you know, more or less on a par, in some ways ahead. I mean, they got ahead. Remember last January, a year ago, when DeepSeek, open source. I mean, open source is Belt and Road. The way the Americans do it, no, they can't afford. They can't afford to buy AI, but they can open source. Well, it enables all sorts of people to use it.
Okay. So I mean, I think you see Trump, in my view. I mean, I think the key here is that he's not strategic, and I think America, if they were really interested in ensuring that China doesn't become a rival to them, they should have been much more smart about identifying that in about 25 years ago.
Yeah.
But they were caught up in a bunch of silly wars, which are very identitarian in the Middle East and other parts, and their foreign policy. I think they just underestimated China. They were like these, which is a racist view as well. These guys will never.
It is a racist.
Yes,
view.
These guys will never actually compete with us
until
they suddenly had better goods and everything else. But I think the other thing is that Trump's going about then trying to have this war on China, but instead of isolating China, he's isolating the US. So he's not trying to build strong alliances with Europe and other partners to say, hey, we're in a problem here. There's this massive Chinese state civilization that's going to come and, you know, destroy us all. Not that that's true at any stretch of the imagination, but or that's a threat to our economic dominance. It's a threat to our cultural dominance. He's isolating the Europeans. He's isolating because he's fighting everyone.
Yeah.
Right. Which is it's a mixture of stupidity and bravado. And it is bound to fail, right? But the thing is, I'm guessing that instinct will self-correct at some point, if not in Trump, but in the U.S. administration. And if Europe has some, and they do have a skin in the game, then so do you see some sort of future before we get to, you know, the final question, which was how is this going to change the whole world? But do you see some future in maybe 4 years or 6 years or 10 years where Europeans and Americans and others who feel the threat from China's dominance, either economically or culturally or any other way, militarily, for example, do you see them working together in a more strategic way for some future?
What, the West?
Yes, the West.
I think the West is in big trouble. I think probably with Trump. I mean, a lot of what you said with Trump, I agree. I think that with Trump, I mean, America's definitely, it's not just Trump. Trump's reflecting a groundswell of opinion in the United States that, you know, which is a return to the past, really, America on its own, you know. I mean, prior to the First World War, America wouldn't have been bound up with all these international organizations and all that kind of thing. So
but it also just wasn't the same country that it was. I mean, it was a rising power, etc. But it just wasn't what it, you know, the rest of the world had colonies and America had itself.
Yeah.
back then.
But America was it was America alone, and this is what Trump
Yes.
Trump believes. This is what Trump believes. He believes everyone else is inferior. If the Europeans won't do our bidding, then we'll kick them into touch and so on. I mean, so I think that I think that we don't know the answer to these questions because they lie in the future. But I think that I think basically the West, as we've known it, is over. And that
Over.
It's
changing.
That idea of the Atlantic Alliance and so on, that is going to weaken, I think.
So you don't think it'll strengthen after like a initial weakening because they'll realize?
Well, it could do. That is a possibility. I think we're in the land of the unknown here. I mean, because obviously there's going to be a lot of changes in Europe as well. I mean, we haven't really seen Europe has just been sort of doing two things: moving to the right, or the rise of the far right, and on the one hand, and on the other hand, trying to appease America and with Trump, and that's been its preoccupation. And then there are now strong voices. Well, we've got to stand up to America. We can't allow Greenland, etc., and all that. Stum made a mistake. Europe made a mistake in not responding to the tariff threat a year ago in the way that it should have done that from April 2025 onwards. So I think that my feeling is that it will be very difficult to put that to get back together again. Now, then there's another aspect to this, which when you talk about alliances, it's not just America and Europe, it's America and, for example, South Korea bases, Japan bases, Taiwan. Now, I think in this situation, Japan is a problem of its own and its own making. But South Korea, I think, isn't going to go with America. I mean,
it's true. It can pivot, yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to play it both ways, but it's probably going to lean more and more towards China.
Yeah, even unintentionally, but it will.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. And Taiwan is going to become part of China. I think that is absolutely inevitable.
Do you mean like in a more soft way, or do you mean in a hard way?
I think that China's shown enormous patience. I don't know whether there's a quote in Kissinger's book on China, where he quotes Mao. I think Mao said something like, "Taiwan is just an island. We can wait 100 years," or something like that. A very long time scale. Yeah. And I think that the Chinese can be very patient because Taiwan is. There are signs of a new political movement anyway in Taiwan, which is more sympathetic towards China. The new leader of the KMT is someone...
Which is part of waiting for 100 years. That will happen.
Yeah. But they'll keep the pressure up, as you can see. And if... I've never really gone with the idea that she will... in 2027 or is going to invade Taiwan. I don't think
it makes strategic sense for them.
It doesn't
the more strategic position is to wait.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And now the world and China's playing a really good. China's really got it right now. It doesn't react to all this stuff going on. It's just quiet self-assurance and reassurance that she and we're getting on with the job. We're modernising China. We're supplying you with electric vehicles. We're the global leader in green technology. We're about to reduce our CO2 emissions massively over the next 20 years. So I think that we are the responsible global leader. I think that's what the China's doing. So I don't think they'd want to invade Taiwan at all. And when I'm in, I got quite well connected in China, and I don't hear them talking about Taiwan a threat. We've known it, we've grown up with it since 1945, is broken, and it won't be possible to put it together again. And that's a problem because the Chinese actually are supportive of the present global order with reforms. That's their position, whereas Trump seems to be basically against it. The big problem the Europeans have got is basically arrogance, I think, towards China. They thought they were superior, that they didn't believe in the rise of China, they wouldn't be able to compete with the top European firms, blah, blah, blah. And look what happens. The biggest, most important industry in Europe is the car industry, and the Chinese have taken them to the cleaners because they were smug, complacent, thought it could never happen. So they're in, Mercedes-Benz, Volkswagen, all these firms are in big trouble. Who would have thought? If you go back to 1978, 1980, the Germans were very far-sighted. Volkswagen was very far-sighted. The Chinese wanted to Western investment, European investment. So I think Volkswagen built its first plant in China in 1982. That's a hell of a long time ago, because they wanted the investment they needed to learn. They needed the technology. Now, what's happened? It's the European firms that need the technology, that need, the know-how of the Chinese firm. It's a complete inversion in the relationship. From being inferior, they're on top. Now, how is Europe going to come to terms with all that? The longer run about America is, because this is too long, but at some point there'll be a calculation in America that getting on with China is better and more profitable than falling out with them and having these big arguments. That at some point, America will have to accept a fundamentally different relationship with China, just like Europe has got to do.
看完这期视频，说实话，最让我感慨的不是马丁出雅克那些犀利的判断，而是他从头到尾都在反复强调的一个核心逻辑：西方正在用自己的傲慢亲手埋葬自己的未来。我们先从特朗普说起。很多人以为特朗普是个意外，是美国政治的一个 bug， 但雅克说得非常清楚，特朗普不是 bug， 他是结果。他说出了美国社会长期压抑的那种不安、愤怒和恐惧，尤其是对中国的恐惧。这种情绪在美国社会早已存在，只是之前没有人敢这么直白地说出来。特朗普把它摆上了台面，然后获得了巨大的政治回报。这说明什么？说明特朗普不是一个人，他背后是整整一代美国人的集体焦虑。但更有意思的是，雅克指出，特朗普本质上是一个新独裁者，他靠行政令统治，绕过国会，攻击移民社区，用关税制度实际上承认了美国经济竞争力的弱点。这不是一个强大国家该有的样子，这是一个正在衰落的国家在慌乱中抓住的最后一根稻草。一个真正自信的超级大国不需要建墙，不需要加关税，不需要威胁盟友，只有当他开始害怕的时候才会做这些事情。然后是全球战略的大撤退，特朗普从全球霸权转向所谓的西方半球，甚至打起了格陵兰的主意。这在几十年前是不可想象的。美国曾经是那个制定全球规则、主导全球秩序的国家，现在他要退回到自己的后院，这不是战略调整，这是战略收缩，是力不从心的真实写照。接下来是最关键的部分，中国。雅克说了一句让我印象特别深的话，他说中国已经太强了，美国根本无法遏制。这句话放在10年前，可能很多人会觉得是吹牛，但现在呢？我们看看数据，从2016年到2024年，中国对美国出口的占比从 19% 到 20% 降到了 13%， 这不是被动下降，这是中国主动的战略调整。中国在系统性的减少对美国市场的依赖，把市场多元化。换句话说，中国在为特朗普 2.0 做周密的准备，更狠的是芯片领域。美国以为用芯片制裁就能卡住中国的脖子，结果呢 DeepSeek 直接开源，把大模型的门槛打到了地板上。 英伟达的黄仁勋都公开说，中国的 AI 能力不容小觑，美国想在科技上脱钩，结果发现脱钩的不是中国，而是美国自己。中国企业在被制裁的压力下，反而加速了自主研发。这就像一个经典的预言，你越想压制什么，什么就长得越快。雅克还点出了一个很多人不愿意承认的事实，美国低估中国，很大程度上是因为种族主义偏见。他们从骨子里觉得中国人不可能比他们强，不可能在科技上超越他们，不可能在全球治理上提出更好的方案。这种傲慢让他们一次又一次地误判中国。从贸易战到科技战，美国每一次出手，最终孤立的不是中国，而是美国自己，然后是台湾问题。这是当下最敏感、最容易引发误判的话题。雅克的判断非常冷静，他说中国不会在2027年入侵台湾，因为最符合中国战略利益的选择是等待。为什么？因为时间在中国这边，中国的综合实力还在上升，而美国的相对实力在下降。每多等1年，统一的筹码就多1分。中国现在不需要急，它只需要保持压力，保持耐心，然后等一个最合适的时机。这是一种战略定力，也是一种战略自信。说到这里，我想补充一个背景。很多人可能不知道，中国现在在全球范围内展现的是一种安静的自信，它不对各种挑衅做出激烈反应，而是默默地做自己的事。现代化建设、绿色技术、电动汽车、全球供应链，中国正在用实际行动告诉世界，我是负责任的全球领导者，我不是来搞破坏的。这种姿态和美国的咄咄逼人形成了鲜明对比。接下来是欧洲，雅克对欧洲的批评毫不留情。他说欧洲最大的问题就是傲慢，他们曾经觉得自己高人一等，觉得中国不可能竞争得过欧洲的顶级企业。结果呢，欧洲最重要的产业汽车工业被中国打得溃不成军，奔驰、大众这些曾经的行业巨头现在都陷入了巨大的困境。这里有一个特别讽刺的细节，1982年大众汽车在中国建了第一家工厂，那时候是中国需要欧洲的技术、欧洲的投资、欧洲的管理经验。40多年过去了，现在是谁需要谁？是欧洲企业需要中国的技术，需要中国企业的 know-how， 整个关系完全反转了。从徒弟到师傅，从落后到领先，中国用40年时间完成了一次史诗级的逆袭。而欧洲人到现在还没有完全接受这个现实，他们还在用老眼光看中国，还在觉得自己是文明的中心。这种傲慢的代价是什么？是市场份额的流失，是产业优势的丧失，是在全球新格局中越来越边缘化。最后，雅克给出了一个终极判断，西方时代已经终结了。1945年以来建立的全球秩序已经破碎，而且不可能再拼回去了。美国最终将不得不接受一个与中国根本不同的关系，就像欧洲必须做的那样。这不是愿不愿意的问题，这是必须面对的现实。那么，这对我们意味着什么？我觉得至少有3点启示。第一，不要被西方的噪音干扰。美国越是叫嚣，越是说明他心里没底。真正的强者不需要大声说话，只需要默默地把自己的事情做好。第二，战略定力比什么都重要。中国从特朗普第1任期学到的最大教训就是，美国不可信，所以中国不抱幻想，不赌对方的善意，只靠自己的实力。这种清醒比任何口号都有力量。第三，历史的天平已经在倾斜。200年的西方主导不是永恒的，它只是历史长河中的一段。现在新的篇章正在开启，而中国是这个新篇章中最重要的角色之一。当然，这不是说我们可以掉以轻心，前路依然充满挑战，科技竞争、地缘博弈、内部发展，每一项都需要全力以赴。但至少我们现在站在了历史正确的一边。好了，这期视频就到这里了。制作视频不易，如果您觉得做得不错，谢谢您动动手指订阅本频道。如果您有更多想法或者建议，也可以在评论区告诉我，都会认真阅读。下期见。